The 2024 NFL Combine kicks off this week in Indianapolis. More than 300 college players are invited to attend to compete at their individual position drills, and they'll be doing interviews throughout the week. Which positions should the Seahawks be looking for throughout the week? Which days are the position drills going to be happening? I bring on Dan Viens of the Seahawks Forever podcast to get into it. Stick around, check it out. Hello and welcome to the Seahawkers podcast. I'm your host, Brandon Schultz, and the NFL Combine is coming up this week, February 26th to March 4th. Of course, we're not going to be seeing any drills until Thursday, but we do have some Combine coverage to talk about it, and I am here joined by Dan Viens of the Seahawks Forever podcast to talk a little bit about what we're going to be watching for coming up throughout the week and on the weekend. Dan, how you doing?
I'm good. It's always good to be on with you. And we have a lot to talk about this offseason, a lot more than normal.
I know. I feel like now that we're into the offseason, you know, you and I, we have our own shows going during the season. It gets busy. Now is the time that we can do some of the crossover stuff and talk about. This is going to be an exciting offseason, man.
Yeah, it is. You know, it's 14 years with the same message and the same narrative and the same, coaching staff. And you get to know, what their tendencies are and lots and lots of change this offseason, which means a lot more for us to talk about. And you've probably seen it on your channel too. A lot more comments, views are up. I mean, people are thirsty for knowledge because we just don't know in a lot of this. We don't know how this is going to turn out.
And that's what makes it exciting. And so you get that sense from fans because we all kind of want to try and decode now the messages from Mike Macdonald. Of course, we don't have our decoder ring yet because it hasn't been quite long enough. And yeah, I saw over on the YouTube side, you guys are up over, gosh, have you cracked 5,000 yet? I know you're getting close.
Yeah, about 5,200 now, kind of broke through that and picked up a lot of that, like just since the coaching change was made, just a lot of added interest. And then, the YouTube algorithm did the rest of it, but lots of support for the channel, which just makes it more fun for me.
Well, it's going to be a fun off season and it's going to be a fun combine coming up because the Seahawks now we're picking toward the middle of the first round. That could change, I suppose. We could see some draft moves, whether or not it's moving up or moving back. I don't even know quite how to gauge with John Schneider and how he might be considering this. I suppose it would depend positionally, but the team has a lot of needs. So maybe we start there. What are some of those needs that you want to be focused on then with the combine coming up this week?
I mean, for me, it starts in the trenches and works back from there. And when I say trenches this year, I think the full front seven on defense is a key because we literally don't have any contributing linebackers from last year that are still under contract or will be after the 18th of March. So I'm looking defensive line, offensive line, linebacker. I think, we've talked about it going back a couple of years. I think most of us that do this would agree that that's where this team fell short in the last couple of years and on both sides of the ball. And I think when you look at Mike Macdonald's track record and history and even Ryan Grubbs and some of the other assistants they've hired, that's been a key to their success and that maybe we'll start to see, the blueprint of this team shift a little bit to where they build it from the front to the back instead of vice versa. And I expect to see that. And maybe it's a little bit of wishful thinking, but that's where I'm going to be focused at the combine, those position groups.
Yeah, linebacker is an interesting place to start because you have Mike Macdonald, who is a former linebacker as a player. He coached linebackers at Atlanta. You've got Adam Dirty, who was the linebackers coach down in Dallas. So now it feels like as deficient as the Seahawks have seemed in terms of depth, that it doesn't seem like a place that they're going to ignore because, gosh, you look at that Ravens team last year that Mike Macdonald coached, and you got Patrick Queen, who's now up to get paid. They paid Roquan Smith, one of the higher contracts in the league. So you have to think that that's a position. And do you expect Bobby to be back, for instance? I mean, gosh,
I don't. Yeah, no. Really the second the hire was announced, if it had been Dan Quinn, maybe there's a connection there. He might have wanted that voice in the locker room. But when you look at, and you just touched on it, when things really turned around for McDonald in his 2 years as DC with the Ravens, it's when they acquired Roquan Smith and paired him with Patrick Queen, and just both those guys being so dynamic next to each other. I just, Bobby's limitations are what they are, and the Seahawks in part let him go the first time because of that, combined with the salary cap hit that was coming up. They were willing to bring him back and kind of live with those limitations because they had a plan. I think they veered from the plan. I don't think the plan was to play him 97% of the snaps or whatever he ended up playing last year. And teams still were picking on him in coverage. He racked up tackles. He was solid in the run game at times. I just think it's time to get more athletic and dynamic there, especially given who's coaching the team now. And fortunately, this year, as opposed to last year, I really, really like the depth of this linebacker group. There's a lot of interior guys that kind of fit that mold, a lot of 230, 235, 245 pound guys on the interior. Whereas last year, even the top ranked interior guys were 220, 225 guys like Dan Henley. So I like the depth of this group, and it should play well to where the Seahawks, have an extra pick in the third and beyond. I'll be shocked if Bobby Wagner is back on this roster.
Well, Thursday is going to be the day to watch then for linebackers. Are there any types of position drills that you particularly look for? Or are you just kind of focused on some players that you're really interested in?
With the offensive linemen, I like just seeing how they can move, and so the stuff, when they have to get out and kind of pull against dummies and things like that, and, where they start off on the turf and they have to get up and they have to react. I like to see the movement skills from the offensive linemen, because outside of that, you're not going to get a feel for how they are against, power or speed pressure or anything like that.
Right.
And I think it's similar with the linebackers too. You want to just see, I think the coverage drills is what I want to see there. How much ground they can cover, how quick they can get into their drops, and then how good their hands are, because some of them aren't.
Right.
And honestly, the defensive linemen is maybe one of my favorite position groups to watch, just because, and you could say this about the offensive linemen too in the last 10, 15 years, but just the sheer athleticism of those guys at their size. It's incredible to see what they do. What's that? The ring drill where they run around the figure eight and they have to pick up the rag off the ground or whatever. It's just shocking to me. And given some of our needs up there this year, I may be rewatching some of that stuff. There's some really enticing guys. I think it's a solid draft for that position as well.
There are some interesting interior defensive spots that the Seahawks could look to fill. Yeah, gosh, when you think about just how much depth that they had an opportunity to go out and get, but decided to focus on other areas in last year's draft. Of course, a lot of it's going to depend on free agency and that sort of thing, but yeah, defensive linemen, linebackers, day one. So you're going to get to see the trenches on that first Thursday. Now, it looks like they're not doing prime time there. So, hey, we're going to be able to do this during the day this year.
Yeah, I hated that. Was it just the 1 year? Did they kind of?
I think it was back-to-back years, because I thought they did it last year. I think they tried to hype up, especially the 40-yard dashes as kind of the prime time event. And I just don't know if that translates.
I don't either. I would guess that what they probably found after that is when it was in prime time is people that were really into this, that wanted to watch it, were probably just watching it the next day anyway, because they just replay it on a loop pretty much for the that week or two around the combine on NFL Network. But I get what they were trying to do. I understand it, but I hated it. I like to get up in the morning, get my coffee, maybe get my notebook out, take some notes and just watch the combine live in the morning. So I'm glad that's behind us.
Yeah, we definitely probably, I'm not going to be missing that.
Yeah.
Friday though, it's going to be defensive backs, tight ends. Tight end is interesting because the Seahawks, they find themselves in a position to where they have, both Noah Fant, Colby Parkinson up for deals. Will Dissly was kind of that third tight end for a lot of the season, but he is one that remains under contract. We'll see what ultimately they could do with him.
A pretty big cap hit too.
It is a pretty big cap hit, but whether they decide to extend him, that could reduce that a little bit.
Mhm.
It would be tough to turn over an entire tight end room. But I think we've also, and maybe you could speak to this, having watched more Huskies football than I have. It doesn't feel like Grubb used tight ends a whole lot in that Huskies offense.
He had a couple good ones, and they'll probably both be drafted this year. Devin Culp and Jack Westover. I think, are they both going to the combine? I got the list here in front of me, but there's 341 names, so it's a lot to scroll through.
Yeah.
I think Westover had 40-ish catches. He spread it around. He incorporated them, but he said it on the record, and we saw it with our own eyes that he had those 3 incredible receivers.
Right.
Even though McMillan was injured for much of the year, that's what he leaned into. I would expect that if he had a pedestrian group of receivers based on the history we've seen and his adaptability, and a couple of big time like day 2 NFL prospects at tight end, maybe one of them would have caught 80 balls. Like, I think he's willing to use the tight ends, and certainly I saw him do it in the Apple Cup a couple of times against my Cougs. And it seems like it is every year. There's a solid group of tight ends. I think the college game is just, kind of getting better about incorporating those guys in their passing offense and all the spread concepts we see down there. And of course, there's the one elite guy in Brock Bowers. He probably won't be there at 16, but
he could be. I mean, you see some of these guys slip down the board depending on, if there's any kind of medical concern. That could be an intriguing prospect if he ends up being there for the Seahawks.
Let me just get this out of the way. If Brock Bowers is a phenomenal player, but if that's how we use our first round pick when we don't have another pick until the third round, that'd be tough. Not knowing what we do in free agency. Maybe, John likes to use free agency to hedge against the draft, and he likes to do it to fill glaring holes so that, he's more free during the draft to let it come to him, especially the last couple of years. That seems to be the emphasis. So who knows? Maybe if we get to draft day and we feel like he's addressed offensive line, defensive line, he's got Leonard Williams locked up and Jordan Brooks is coming back. Okay. Because he is a dynamic player, and they need somebody. Right now, it's Will Dissly and Brady Russell are the only 2 guys really under contract, unless you include Tyler Mabry, who's back for what feels like his 10th year on a futures deal.
We'll always have Mabry. He will retire as a Seahawk eventually, 20 years down the road, because he hasn't had to play a whole lot.
He's the biggest fan of the new practice squad rules. Yeah. That you can just stay on it ad infinitum. Yeah.
It could be an interesting watch for tight ends. I think Saturday though is the day that we are maybe the most interested in. As football fans, because you've got the quarterbacks, you've got wide receivers, running backs, the offensive skill positions. Although you could argue that the Seahawks may not really have a need at any of those spots. It still is one of the more fun days to watch. And I think John Schneider's gone long enough without drafting a quarterback that we need to see at least one.
Yeah. How often have we heard him say that, I learned from Ron Wolf coming up through the Packers organization that you take a quarterback every year. And for a long time, Green Bay really did well at that. Mm-hmm. And people obviously remember Aaron Rodgers and Jordan Love, but there was a run there during Wolf's heyday where they got a lot of value by trading guys they had developed as backups and gotten draft picks back for him. And Mark Brunell and Aaron Brooks and Ty Detmer are 3 that I can think of off the top of my head. And Matt Hasselbeck. Yeah. Another one who was essentially a third stringer there and could, barely make the roster. And every draft we hear John say it, I want to draft a quarterback every year, but then it just doesn't work out. Well, some of that might be, I suspect, that someone was tapping him on the shoulder going, couldn't we use that pick somewhere else?
Yeah.
Because that person had contractual power of final say over the roster. Well, and they're not involved anymore. So
when you have Gino and you have Drew, they keep talking up Drew as if he's going to return. And so if you're talking about both those guys returning, then, what I guess it comes down to if you're even going to carry a third, because that's not something they've done traditionally.
I think that's the thing. They've never carried a third on the regular roster, and they've always tended to prefer an experienced backup. You know, it was Tavarius Jackson. It was Geno Smith year after year on a 1-year deal. And now it seems like the plan is to continue doing that with Drew Lock. It does make it tough to develop a quarterback. You know, they tried with Holton Ahlers on the practice squad last year. The reps just aren't there. It's tough. I think if you're going to develop a quarterback of the future, regardless of where you draft him, you have to commit to him being the number 2 guy. It seems like, you know, the Jake Browning stories are very rare where a guy toils on the practice squad for 3-4 years, moves his way up to backup, gets an opportunity. You know, it's tough. And I don't love the I don't love the third tier of this quarterback class and beyond. So
yeah, but the third tier was like our first tier the last couple of years, it feels like.
Yeah, that's how good this class is, and that's why a lot of fans want us to dip into it. But kind of made me look good yesterday. I did a show yesterday morning about how I think the Seahawks may very well be leaning towards punting on quarterback this year and waiting towards next year. And I laid out all my arguments why. And then 5 hours later, the news came out that they essentially had committed to Geno again for 2024 with what they did with his contract. And so I think they see what we see, most of us anyway, that 16 isn't high enough to get the guy you're really going to want. They don't have the ammo to move up. They have a really good guy in place on a very reasonable contract. It's just not the time. You have a new coach in place. You've got to get him as many tools to be able to carry out, you know, what he wants to do schematically and kind of establish their style of play before you can work a quarterback in there. If you're trying to break in a new head coach and a new quarterback, you're rebuilding.
Right.
And that's not what John Schneider thinks, you know, this is ahead of us. He said it at his first press conference. He thought they underperformed last year with the young roster that we have. He doesn't see this as a rebuild. And so that's why I think they're going a different direction. It's still going to be fun to watch that. And you're right. I have yet to watch any scouting tape yet on running backs or wide receivers.
Right.
Because it's just such a low need. If it's one at all, I could see them not drafting either of those positions with our 6 picks. I guess we have 7 picks.
Yeah. And wide receivers one, it seems like they always tend to dip into that. And late round running backs too.
Not a bad idea.
But it does feel like they're pretty good in those spots. But quarterbacks, I know that just with Michael Penix, and are we going to see Penix throw?
I saw yesterday or the day before that he said he's going to.
Okay.
He's the only one that said anything so far.
Because he was kind of beat up in that championship game.
Yeah, I was actually surprised he practiced Senior Bowl week, and I'm glad he didn't take a lot of criticism for not playing in the game, just for that reason.
I didn't have any expectation.
Yeah, I thought, you know, whatever it was, we never really heard, I don't think officially, but it sure seemed like ribs and a lot of other stuff. He looked,
just watching him walk off the field, I'm like, that dude doesn't look like he's going to be ready for anything for a little while.
I'm a guy that's not getting any younger, and he looked during that game like I feel every morning when I get out of bed. It's like the old movie North Dallas 40, where Nick Nolte had to kind of crack everything and sort of pull himself up. That's what I thought he looked like, and so I thought it was to his credit actually that he practiced all week and showed what he could show, and you know, I think he's the biggest arm. Without a doubt that we're going to see. Drake May maybe right behind him. I don't think it's going to quite be like last year's shootout with Anthony Richardson and Will Levis kind of trading bombs, but be interested to see him throw, and some of the other guys as well. I think would really behoove that. I think they should all throw. Like if I'm a quarterback's agent, I'm telling them to throw, because I think it says something to teams about your willingness to take a chance and just show what you're made of.
Yeah, and I shoot on Friday, Kurt Warner tweeted out saying, trying to go back through the tape and find NFL style throws throughout these college offenses. Like he was having to go through 6 to 7 games to find a handful of throws to where he could evaluate a quarterback at that kind of NFL throw level.
Yeah.
And so, man, I just think if Kurt's having that kind of a hard time, then you've kind of got to go out and show it then at the combine to where they're making you throw slants and, you know, some of these deep throws and to show off your accuracy as well as you can. I mean, throwing, you know, outside of your pads.
Yeah, and every year there's a quarterback that has probably the most to gain by performing well at the combine. And last year, I think it was Stroud. I mean, he put on such a clinic in his throwing session that it solidified, him as a top 3 guy. I think this year I think Bo Nix has a lot to prove standing next to those guys. There's some questions about his arm strength, his ability to push the ball down the field into tight windows, and that's just not what he was asked to do at Oregon. But for me, it's JJ McCarthy. I think he's kind of the wild card in this whole quarterback group because he just wasn't asked. Again, he didn't need to throw the ball a lot at Michigan, but I've been told, and I've seen some stuff on tape, and I've read enough stuff about him that I think he's the guy that might open the most eyes at the combine. There are fans out there certainly who don't think his arm is anything special, and it is. And I think when they see him throw in the underwear Olympics, they're going to see how easy that ball comes out, and they're going to see really, really skinny legs too, and that's a concern. But he's going to look good throwing the ball.
Yeah. Well, we'll be watching for it. And then on Sunday, you go from the skinny leg guys on Saturday to the big trunks on Sunday with the offensive linemen. And this is going to be a spot of need for the Seahawks because
absolutely
offensive line with the center spot going vacant. Maybe they bring back Evan Brown, but you do have Oluwatimi coming back too as a potential center. We did see some starts from him throughout the year, but Damian Lewis could be on the way out. That's one free agent that maybe they find some room to be able to sign him long term, and maybe that ends up being one of those spots that you have to fill through the draft and really start to build this core with your tackles. Shoot, I'm not even convinced that tackle is a spot that they shouldn't look at, considering what we went through this past season.
Yeah, and there's still so much mystery around Abe Lucas, and I've heard people say that there are indications he's going to be just fine, and that whatever procedure it was that he had and it worked, it's going to work, and he'll be good to go. And there are others who think that there's more to it than that. So it's maybe the most mysterious position group on the roster because we don't quite know what kind of players Ryan Grubb, Mike McDonald like, and on that interior and how he plans to use them. He's been very varied in his approach in the running game. And, a guy like Anthony Bradford, who showed so much in the run game last year, has some work to do in pass protection. He's a big mauling type right guard. Does that fit what Ryan Grubb wants to do, or will he tailor what he wants to do to that? I'm a big Oluwatimi fan. I'm a little surprised that so many fans want us to take a center in the first round and see that as a big need. I think he's a long-term starter. And certainly, Coach McDonald's going to have some intel there because he knows Jim Harbaugh so well.
Right.
And there's a
Jackson Power Johnson, I think, is the guy that Seahawks fans would like to take that played center, but he's also played some guards. So,
well, and that's why I'm going to be watching this group real closely. There's a group of guys kind of in the mid to late first round sort of big board area that you see that have versatility. And those guys are really appealing to me. JPJ can play center and guard. Graham Barton's another one that's actually played guard, tackle, and he can be projected at center. And then Zach Frazier's another one. There are guys that have that versatility that I wouldn't mind, picking up a guy that has played some tackle just in case Lucas isn't ready to go. And then Damian Lewis, we don't know how they view him. We don't know if they view him as a match. Guards that have started for 4 years and are in their mid-20s tend to get paid on the open market a lot, maybe more than they're willing to go or able to go, and they may even be looking at a different. I don't know how young they want to be up front. If you're going with Bradford and Oluwatimi, for example,
yeah, it feels really young
to plug a foot in.
There's
another draft
Zeitler, for example, could come in from the Ravens on a free agency deal, so they could potentially find. Yeah.
I could see that being a spot for like a short-term stopgap
type
veteran,
So there'd be those veterans out there that you could potentially sign. But yeah, if they did sign Damian Lewis, I don't think I could be mad about it just based off of you've had a guy who then you're kind of building continuity. I mean, I guess I could be mad if the contract is like way out of line, but
if it prevents us from if Lewis
prevents him from keeping Leonard Williams or
but I don't think they would do that. I just keep remembering what Mike Holmgren said after he had been away for a while. And he said if he could go back and do it all over again, he would do it differently. And what he did wrong was he filled out his defense with veterans and free agents, and he went young and drafted for offense. He said that was backwards. You got to be young and hungry on defense for the most part, and you need continuity on offense. And he would have gone with more veterans and spent some of their free agent money there. I keep thinking about that, and this might be a case for that. Where I would if they announce that Damian Lewis has agreed to a new deal, A, it tells us that they like him and they think he fits, and B, essentially that starting five is back if you count Oluwatimi as a starter. So that's never a bad thing to have continuity on the offensive line.
Well, we've got some offensive linemen to watch coming up on through the combine. And as we watch the combine, Dan, what are your plans over at Seahawks Forever? Are you going to be going live after every day, or just kind of picking a couple days to talk about on your show?
Unless I see something that really stands out or there's news, I'll probably just do a big wrap up at the end of it. Sunday evening, the March the 3rd. Look for that, and I'm already making some notes and toying with some ideas of people like lists, so top 3 or top 5 guys that I think would fit the Seahawks. That's what I'm looking for, is guys that I think would fit what they need and what they're doing, and because we start to learn more about these prospects during the combine in another way too. We start to hear about how well they interview, and we start to find out a little bit about them and who they are as people and their personalities, which is always going to be important to John Schneider and whoever's coaching for him. So that's the plan for now, unless there's anything, newsy that comes out. And then before that, though, before it even gets started, I plan to react to the press conferences that John Schneider and Mike McDonald are scheduled to do as part of their combine duties. So that sometimes they're nothing, but it's always kind of fun to try to read between the lines.
Yeah, absolutely. And that'd be the first time that they've been together since the McDonald hire. So
I take that back. Sorry to interrupt you. Schneider said yesterday that the coaches aren't going to the combine. So I think it's just going to be Schneider at the podium.
Oh, I took that to mean the assistant coaches, but I guess that would make sense too. Cause he did a radio spot, I think on Thursday last week. And so, he did say that the coaches weren't going to be there. And I thought maybe McDonald.
They have to get to know each other.
Yeah. But I guess it would make sense for McDonald to be with the rest of the coaches too. So
they have to do install and all of that and get ready for off-season activities. I laugh, but it's probably true. They just, yesterday, I think was the first day they officially announced the entire list.
Right.
I don't think all of those guys have been in the same room at the same time yet.
Yeah, that's wild, huh? It's it is a crazy time for the Seahawks franchise, a crazy time for us who follow them. And we're going to be coming on live here too at the Seahawkers podcast, talking about some of the combine moments that caught our eye as well. So be sure to follow along here. Follow along at Seahawks Forever with Dan Viens. Dan, appreciate you coming on and helping break this down this week.
Always good to talk to you, and appreciate the time.
And I think with that, there's only one thing left to say. Go Hawks.
Go Hawks.